Picture this for a second, because it's about to matter more than you think. A 13-year-old boy, orange jacket torn at the shoulder, standing in the mouth of a ravine with rain hammering down around him like the sky itself is trying to wash away what's about to happen. 3 shadows retreating into the tree-line behind him. And not one of them looks back. If you've been with this channel for a while, you know the drill by now. We don't do the story the way the anime told it. We ask the question nobody wants to answer. And today's question is brutal. What if the people who were supposed to have Naruto's back didn't? Stick with me on this one. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because this series is going to get much darker before it gets better, and trust me, you don't want to miss where this goes. Let's rewind 12 hours and watch exactly how it happened. It started, like most disasters do, as something completely routine. Team 7 had been summoned to the Hokage's office on a gray, humid morning. The kind where the air sits heavy over Konoha and every genin secretly hopes the mission is a D rank so they can go home early. No such luck. Tsunade had a scroll waiting on her desk, the wax seal already broken, her expression unreadable in that particular way that meant this one isn't simple. Escort mission, she said, sliding the scroll across the desk toward Kakashi. A merchant caravan traveling from the coast near the old land of Whirlpool's territory. They're carrying trade goods bound for Konoha. Nothing flashy, mostly textiles and preserved foodstuffs. But the road cuts through some unclaimed borderland, and there have been reports of bandit activity. B rank, maybe pushing into A rank territory if things go sideways. Sakura's hand shot up immediately, ever the diligent student. Why us? Isn't this something a Chunin escort team usually handles? Normally, yes. Tsunade's eyes flicked toward Kakashi. But the last 2 escort teams that took this route reported unusually coordinated ambushes. Whoever's out there isn't your average bandit gang. I want a Jonin-led team with combat experience, not just genin running numbers. Sasuke, arms crossed against the wall, said nothing, which, if you know Sasuke, was basically his version of enthusiastic agreement. And Naruto? Naruto was practically vibrating with excitement, because to him, every mission was a chance to prove something. He didn't know yet that this particular mission would be the one that changed everything. None of them did. When do we leave? He asked, grinning. Within the hour, Kakashi said, already rolling up the scroll. Pack light. We move fast, we escort, we come home. Simple. Famous last words, right? You already know it's not going to be simple. It never is. The walk to the rendezvous point took the better part of a day. And if you've watched any of my other What-If series, you know I love giving you these quieter moments before the storm, because they matter. They're the last version of these characters before everything changes. Sakura walked beside Sasuke, trying to make conversation he barely reciprocated, dressed practically for the terrain in her long-sleeved training gear, hair tied back out of habit. Naruto trailed a few paces behind, kicking pebbles down the dirt road, occasionally jogging ahead just to double back again out of restless energy. You're gonna wear yourself out before we even get there, Sakura called back to him at one point. Nah, Naruto said, hands behind his head. I've got plenty of energy. Believe it, Kakashi, walking point with his ever-present orange book tucked under one arm, though notably, he wasn't reading it, which for those of you who know Kakashi's habits, should have been the first warning sign that he was more tense about this mission than he let on. Glanced back at his team. Focus, he said mildly. We're entering border territory soon. I want everyone alert. The merchant caravan they were escorting consisted of 3 wagons and a handful of nervous traders who'd clearly heard the stories about the last 2 escort teams. Their leader, a thin, weathered man named Toma, kept glancing over his shoulder at the tree line like he expected it to sprout enemies at any moment. You're sure 4 ninja is enough? Toma asked Kakashi at one point, wringing his hands. It's enough, Kakashi said simply. Trust me. Here's the thing about that line, and I want you to remember it, because it's going to come back around in a way that hurts. Trust me. Kakashi believed it when he said it. He had every reason to believe it. His team had grown. Sasuke had returned to the fold after everything with Orochimaru. Sakura had sharpened her skills under Tsunade. And Naruto, well, Naruto had grown too. Just maybe not in the way anyone expected yet. They made camp that evening near a narrow ravine that cut through the forest like a scar in the earth, deep, jagged, lined with loose rock that hadn't fully settled since whatever ancient upheaval carved it centuries ago. Sakura brewed tea over a small fire for the group, the warm steam curling up into the cool evening air, and for a moment, everything felt almost peaceful. Tomorrow we cross through the ravine pass, Kakashi said, studying a hand-drawn map by firelight. Tightest point on the route. If anyone's going to hit us, that's where they'll do it. Great, Naruto muttered through a mouthful of rice. So we just gotta be ready. We're always ready, Sasuke said flatly, not looking up. If only that had been entirely true. Morning came with fog thick enough to swallow sound, and if you've ever walked through terrain like that, where visibility drops to maybe 10 feet and every rustle in the brush makes your skin crawl, you already know that's exactly the kind of morning where nothing good happens. The caravan moved slowly through the ravine pass, wagon wheels grinding over uneven stone, the walls of the ravine rising steep on either side. Kakashi walked ahead, senses sharp despite his usual laid-back demeanor. Sakura and Sasuke flanked the wagons. Naruto brought up the rear, glancing behind them every few seconds out of habit more than genuine suspicion. Then the fog moved wrong. That's the only way to describe it. Kakashi noticed it first, the way the mist seemed to shift against a breeze that wasn't there. His Sharingan flared open beneath his headband a half-second before the first kunai came screaming out of the gray. Ambush. Defensive positions. Now, what followed was chaos. Not the clean, choreographed kind of fight you might expect, the messy, disorienting kind where you can't tell how many enemies you're actually facing because the fog keeps swallowing them the moment they retreat a few steps. Sasuke moved fast, deflecting a volley of kunai with his own before diving into the mist after the source. Sakura shielded the terrified merchants, chakra-enhanced fists ready to shatter anything that got too close. Kakashi was already 3 shadow clones deep into the fog, trying to pin down numbers. And Naruto threw himself straight into the thickest part of the fighting, exactly like always, exactly like you'd expect from him. There's gotta be at least 10 of them, he shouted, dodging a strike from a masked mercenary wielding twin blades. Focus on protecting the caravan. Kakashi's voice cut through the mist. Don't overextend. But this wasn't a bandit gang, and that became brutally clear within the first 2 minutes. These were trained mercenaries, coordinated, disciplined, moving with the kind of tactical precision that suggested serious backing. Someone had paid good money for this ambush, and whoever they were, they clearly wanted something from that caravan badly enough to throw real muscle at it. Toma the merchant leader screamed something about the special cargo, a detail conveniently left out of the original mission briefing, which, again, if you've watched enough of these ninja missions play out, you know is exactly the kind of detail that turns a B-rank escort into a nightmare. The fighting pushed toward the ravine's edge. Sakura, cornered by 2 mercenaries at once, found herself backed against loose, crumbling rock at the ravine's rim, the same unstable terrain Kakashi had warned about the night before. Sakura! Naruto's voice cracked with urgency as he spotted her position. One of the mercenaries raised a blade for a killing strike, and Sakura, mid-combo with the other attacker, couldn't pivot in time. Naruto didn't think. He just moved. He slammed into her from the side, shoving her clear of the strike, and in doing so, put himself directly beneath the section of ravine wall that had been groaning under stress since the fighting started, shaking loose rock with every explosive jutsu and heavy footfall. The wall gave way. Tons of stone and earth collapsed in an instant, a deafening roar swallowing Naruto whole in a cloud of dust and debris. Sakura screamed his name, scrambling toward the rubble even as the mercenary she'd been fighting tried to press the advantage. Naruto, here's where this story becomes something different from what you're used to. Because in the show, in the manga, Naruto always gets pulled from the rubble in the nick of time. Kurama's chakra heals him. Someone digs him out. The plot armor holds. But what if it didn't hold this time? What if the moment demanded something worse? Kakashi arrived at the rubble seconds after the collapse, chakra-enhanced strength already tearing through debris, shouting Naruto's name. But the mercenaries weren't done. If anything, sensing the chaos, they pressed harder, converging on the exposed position with renewed aggression. Sasuke was pulled into a 2-on-1 fight of his own further down the ravine. Sakura, injured from the earlier clash, was barely holding her ground against a mercenary who'd clearly identified her as the weakest link to exploit. Kakashi dug for nearly 90 seconds, an eternity in a fight like this, finding only crushed rock, twisted debris, and no response. No chakra signature he could detect through the disturbed earth. No sound, no movement, and the mercenaries kept coming. This is the moment, right here, that decides everything. Because Kakashi, copy ninja, veteran of countless life-or-death calls, had to make one of the hardest decisions of his career in about 3 seconds flat: keep digging and risk his remaining team being overwhelmed and killed, or pull back, protect what he could still protect, and accept a devastating loss. Kakashi-sensei, we can't just... Sakura's voice broke as she parried another strike, blood running down her arm. The caravan is compromised, we're outnumbered, and I have no confirmation Naruto is even. Kakashi's voice was tight, clipped, the words costing him something visible even through his mask. We fall back. Now. No! Sakura's scream cracked across the ravine, raw with a grief that hadn't even fully processed yet. We can't leave him. We have to, Sakura. Kakashi's tone left no room for argument, the kind of command voice that cuts through panic because it has to. I need you and Sasuke alive. That's an order. Sasuke, disengaging from his own fight with a shallow gash along his forearm, looked back at the collapsed section of ravine wall, really looked at it, at the sheer volume of stone that had come down, and for just a moment, something flickered across his face that wasn't his usual composed indifference. Something closer to genuine horror. There's no way he survived that, Sasuke said quietly. It wasn't a question. We don't have time to confirm it, Kakashi said, and if you listen closely to how he said it, there's something underneath the tactical necessity, something that sounds almost like he was trying to convince himself as much as his team. Sasuke, get the merchants moving. Sakura, cover our retreat. We regroup at the fallback point 2 kilometers out. Kakashi-sensei, please. Sakura's voice was barely holding together. That's an order, Sakura. And so, under a fog-choked sky with mercenaries still pressing the attack, Team 7 retreated, dragging the surviving merchants, abandoning the ravine, abandoning the search, abandoning the boy buried somewhere beneath tons of shattered stone. If you're watching this and feeling sick to your stomach right now, good. You should. Because this is the moment that breaks something that's going to take a very, very long time to put back together, and I promise you, by the end of this series, you'll understand exactly why this decision haunts every single one of them. Don't forget to hit that like button if this hit you as hard as it hit me writing it, because it only gets heavier from here. Let's stay behind for a moment. Let's not follow Kakashi's retreat just yet, because underneath that rubble, something was still happening. The collapse had been catastrophic, yes, enough stone and shattered rock to crush a fully grown man beneath its weight without mercy. By every reasonable measure, Naruto shouldn't have survived the initial impact, let alone the following minutes buried beneath it, cut off from air, from light, from any hope of rescue. But reasonable measures had never really applied to Naruto Uzumaki, had they? Deep beneath the rubble, in a pocket of crushed stone barely large enough to contain his broken, bleeding body, something ancient and dormant stirred. It wasn't Kurama. The fox's chakra was present, working its usual slow, stubborn magic on torn muscle and cracked bone, but this was something else. Something older than the fox's seal. Something that had been sleeping in Naruto's blood since before he was born, waiting for a moment desperate enough to wake it. A single, faint pulse of reddish-gold light flickered somewhere beneath the crushed stone, so faint, so brief, that if anyone had been standing at the surface, they might have mistaken it for a trick of the fading light through the dust-choked air. But no one was standing at the surface. No one was watching. No one was there to see it at all. That's the tragedy of this whole chapter, if you think about it. The single most important moment of Naruto's entire life. The very first spark of something that would eventually change everything about who he was, happened in complete isolation, witnessed by absolutely no one, because the people who should have been there had already walked away. 2 kilometers out, at the fallback point, Team 7 regrouped with the surviving merchants. Toma was shaking, muttering apologies about the cargo, about the ambush, about everything that had gone wrong. Sakura sat apart from the group, knees pulled to her chest, staring back in the direction of the ravine with an expression that had gone past crying into something hollower and more frightening. Sasuke stood at the edge of the camp, arms crossed, saying nothing, but his eyes kept drifting back the way they'd come. And Kakashi sat with his back against a tree, mask pulled down just slightly to reveal the tightness in his jaw, staring at nothing in particular. He'd made calls like this before. Hard calls. Calls that cost lives to save others. It came with the headband, with the rank, with the job. He knew that better than almost anyone alive. But this one felt different. This one felt like it was going to sit in his chest for a very long time. "We'll send a retrieval team," he said finally, mostly to himself. "Once the area is secure. We'll bring him home." Nobody responded. What was there to say? Back at the ravine, buried under stone that had already begun, ever so slightly, to shift and crack from within, something was happening that none of them could have imagined. A hand, bloodied and broken, twitched beneath the rubble. Fingers curled slowly, painfully, into a weak fist, and somewhere deep beneath layers of crushed stone, a heartbeat that should have stopped kept stubbornly, impossibly beating. Time moves strangely when you're buried alive. I imagine it does, anyway, stretched thin between unconsciousness and agony, between the crushing weight above and the desperate animal need to keep breathing in air that barely exists. Naruto's mind drifted in and out, fragments of memory bleeding together with the pain. He saw Sakura's face, twisted in fear as the ravine wall came down. He saw Kakashi's Sharingan flashing through fog. He saw, for just a moment, something that didn't belong to any memory he actually had, a woman with fierce red hair and a warm, determined smile, standing in front of what looked like the ruins of some great village, whispering words he couldn't quite make out. Uzumaki. The word floated through his fractured consciousness like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward into nothing. His body, battered and broken in more places than a normal person could survive, was already knitting itself back together at a rate that defied everything doctors would tell you was possible. Kurama's chakra working overtime, forcing cracked ribs to mend, torn muscle to reknit, collapsed lung tissue to slowly, painfully reinflate. It wasn't fast. It wasn't painless. But it was happening, and underneath that familiar healing process, something else moved. Something that had nothing to do with the fox at all. Deep in the marrow of his bones, in the coiled chakra network unique to his bloodline, something ancient responded to the sheer, desperate proximity of death, the same way it might have responded, generations ago, to countless Uzumaki ancestors who'd faced their own impossible odds in their own impossible moments. It was instinct older than memory. Older than the village that bore his mother's clan name, older than the seal that bound the fox inside him. It didn't fully wake. Not yet. This chapter isn't about the awakening. That's still coming, and trust me, when it happens, you're going to want to see every second of it. But it stirred. And in stirring, it did one crucial thing. It kept him alive long enough for what came next to matter. Hours passed. The fog cleared. The sun rose somewhere far above the crushed stone, though no light reached the pocket where Naruto lay. His body, healing at its unnatural pace, slowly regained enough strength for something extraordinary and utterly mundane at the same time. His hand moved. Fingers dug weakly into loose rubble, scraping, pushing, finding just enough space to shift a few inches of debris. It was agonizing, slow work, the kind of desperate, animal effort that has nothing to do with jutsu or bloodlines or destiny, and everything to do with sheer, stubborn will to survive. I'm not dying here, he thought, if you could even call the fragmented, pain-soaked static in his skull a coherent thought. Not like this. Not buried. Not alone. Alone. That word cut through the haze with unexpected clarity, and something in his chest, something that had nothing to do with crushed ribs, ached at the shape of it. They're not coming back for me, are they? It wasn't quite a question. Some deep, wounded part of him already knew the answer, buried under the same rubble that had almost buried him for good. By the time evening fell again, a full day after the collapse, Naruto had managed to claw enough space through the loosest section of debris to find air that wasn't thick with dust. It wasn't freedom, not yet. But it was enough to breathe properly for the first time since the wall came down, enough to feel the cool evening air against a face caked in blood and dirt. He lay there for a long time, staring up at a narrow sliver of darkening sky visible through the gap he'd carved, chest rising and falling in shallow, painful breaths. He thought about Sakura's scream. He thought about the way the fog had swallowed everything. He thought, with a bitterness that surprised even him, about Kakashi's voice giving the order to fall back. They left me. Not they thought I was dead and made a hard call. Not yet, that more generous framing would come later, if it came at all. Right now, broken and buried and utterly alone, all Naruto could feel was the simple, brutal fact of it. His team had walked away and left him behind. It's a familiar wound for him, isn't it? If you've watched Naruto's story from the beginning, you know abandonment is basically the water he's always swum in, the village that feared him as a child, the father figure he lost before ever knowing him, the mother he never got to meet. But somehow, this felt different. This wasn't the village. This wasn't strangers. This was his team, the people who were supposed to have his back no matter what. He didn't cry. He wanted to, maybe, somewhere underneath the numbness, but the tears wouldn't come. Like even his body understood there was no time for that yet. Instead, he did the only thing he really knew how to do. He kept moving. Inch by agonizing inch, he widened the gap he'd carved, ignoring the fresh pain lancing through freshly healed muscle every time he shifted his weight wrong. It took hours. It took every scrap of stubborn will Kurama's chakra could fuel. But sometime deep into that second night, under a sky finally clear of the ambush's fog, Naruto Uzumaki dragged himself free of the collapsed ravine and collapsed instead onto solid, open ground, bruised, bloodied, half-starved, and completely, utterly alone. He lay there under the stars for a long moment, catching his breath, staring up at a sky that felt bigger and colder than it ever had before. Then, because there was truly nothing else to do, he forced himself upright and began to walk. He had no idea which direction led back to Konoha. He had no idea how far the ambush had pushed them from the original route. All he knew was that he needed to move, needed to find water, needed to find something, before his body, healed as it was, simply gave out from exhaustion and hunger. So he walked, stumbling through unfamiliar forest under a canopy of unfamiliar stars, following nothing but instinct and the distant, briny scent of salt water carried on the night breeze, a scent that tugged at something deep and unnamed inside him, pulling him forward like a thread he didn't know he was following, toward the coast, toward the ruins of a village that no longer existed on any map Konoha still used, toward Uzushiogakure. 3 days. That's how long Naruto walked before the trees finally thinned out and gave way to open coastline. 3 days of stumbling through unfamiliar forest on a body that had been crushed under a collapsed ravine wall less than 72 hours earlier, a body that, by any normal measure, should have still been in a hospital bed, if it had survived at all. But Kurama's chakra doesn't work on normal measures, does it? It works on stubborn, grinding, agonizing increments, knitting torn muscle and cracked bone back together just fast enough to keep a boy walking who really shouldn't have been walking at all. He didn't eat much in those 3 days. A handful of unfamiliar berries he wasn't entirely sure were safe, choked down out of desperation more than confidence. Water from a shallow stream that tasted faintly of minerals he didn't recognize. His stomach had long since stopped growling and settled into a hollow, gnawing ache that he'd simply learned to walk through, the same way he'd learned to walk through so many other things in his life. If you're thinking this sounds less like the confident, loud-mouthed Naruto you're used to seeing bounce off the walls of every scene he's in, you're right. That's the point. Strip away the team, strip away the village, strip away every familiar face that usually anchors him, and what you're left with is something rawer, quieter, a boy who has nothing left to prove to anyone watching, because nobody is watching at all. He talked to himself sometimes, in that emptiness. Not full conversations, just fragments, muttered under his breath to keep the silence from swallowing him whole. Just gotta keep moving, he mumbled on the second day, stumbling over an exposed root, catching himself before he fell. Find water. Find people. Somebody's gotta be around here somewhere. Nobody answered, of course. Nobody ever does out here. By the third morning, the forest began to change. The trees grew sparser, twisted by salt wind into strange, bent shapes. The ground turned sandier underfoot, and the air carried a thick, briny weight that clung to the back of his throat. And underneath all of it, faint, but unmistakable, was a hum. He couldn't explain it if you asked him. It wasn't sound exactly. Not something his ears picked up. It was something deeper than that, something that lived in his chakra network rather than his eardrums. A low, resonant pull, like a tuning fork struck somewhere far away, vibrating in sympathy with something buried inside his own blood. He stopped walking, standing at the edge of the treeline, staring out at a coastline he didn't recognize. "What is that?" he murmured. The hum didn't answer. But it didn't stop either. If anything, it grew slightly stronger the longer he stood there, like it was calling him forward. So he kept walking. What Naruto found, cresting the final dune between forest and coastline, wasn't a village, it was the grave of one. Ruins stretched out along the curve of the bay as far as he could see, collapsed towers half swallowed by encroaching vines, shattered stone walls worn smooth by decades of salt wind and tide, the skeletal remains of what must have once been a genuinely massive settlement, now reduced to rubble and silence. Broken support beams jutted from the sand like the ribs of some long-dead creature. Faded, weather-worn symbols were carved into standing stone here and there, spiral patterns, hauntingly familiar in a way that made something tighten in Naruto's chest before he even consciously placed why. He knew that symbol. He'd seen it 100 times without ever knowing what it meant. It was stitched onto the back of his own jacket. "This is..." He started, then stopped, because he genuinely didn't know how to finish that sentence. "This is what? This is where?" He had no context for what he was looking at, only a growing, uneasy certainty that it mattered, that whatever this place had been, it was connected to him in some way he couldn't yet name. He walked into the ruins slowly, almost reverently, boots crunching over broken stone and sun-bleached debris. The scale of the destruction became more apparent the deeper he went. This hadn't just crumbled from age. Entire sections of wall showed the unmistakable scarring of large-scale jutsu impacts, scorch marks bleached pale by years of weather but still faintly visible if you knew what you were looking at. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't been a natural disaster. It had been a war. "Somebody attacked this place," he said quietly, crouching to examine a cracked support column, running his fingers along a groove that looked disturbingly like it had been carved by a massive blade. "A long time ago, but somebody definitely attacked this place." The hum in his chakra grew stronger the further inland he wandered, pulling him, gently, insistently, toward the heart of the ruined settlement, where the largest structures had once stood. He passed the collapsed remains of what might have been a marketplace, judging by the scattered fragments of pottery and broken stalls. He passed a series of stone archways, their spiral engravings more intact here than anywhere else he'd seen so far, standing like sentinels over what must have once been a significant thoroughfare. And then, cresting a final rise, he saw it, a massive structure, half collapsed but still standing taller than anything else in the ruins, its entrance flanked by 2 enormous stone pillars carved with the same spiral symbol, larger and more detailed than any he'd seen elsewhere. The hum in his chest had become something closer to a pulse now, steady and insistent, drawing him toward that entrance like a fish on a line. "Okay," he breathed, staring up at the towering ruin. "Okay, that's definitely where I'm supposed to go." Since when did he start listening to unexplained humming sensations in his own chakra network? Since exactly the moment his team left him for dead in a ravine and he had absolutely nothing left to lose. Grief and abandonment have a funny way of making a person more open to things that don't make immediate sense. He climbed the crumbling steps toward the entrance, each one worn smooth by centuries of feet that had once walked this path, feet that belonged to people who were, in some way he was only beginning to understand, his people. The interior of the structure was darker than he expected, sunlight fading fast the deeper he went, forcing him to rely on chakra-sharpened senses to navigate the crumbling corridors. Dust hung thick in the stagnant air, undisturbed for what felt like decades. Broken statuary lined the walls at intervals, figures too weathered to make out clearly, though something about their posture suggested they'd once been depicted mid-motion, performing some kind of ceremonial gesture with their hands. Seal work, he realized, squinting at the closest one. Their hands were positioned like they were forming a hand seal, one he didn't recognize, which, given how many hand seals he'd learned over the years, was saying something. "This whole place is about sealing," he murmured, more to himself than to the empty corridor. Like, really about sealing. He thought suddenly of his mother, a woman he'd never known, a face he'd only seen once, in a memory not even his own, offered to him in a desperate final moment inside his own mind by the very fox sealed within him. Kushina Uzumaki. He knew, distantly, that his mother's clan had some connection to sealing techniques. Jiraiya had mentioned it once, offhand, something about the Uzumaki clan's reputation for fuinjutsu mastery being so feared that it had contributed to their downfall generations ago. Was that what this place was? The ruins of his mother's clan? The pulse in his chakra network grew stronger with every step deeper into the structure, until finally the corridor opened into a wide chamber, and there, in the center of that chamber, standing untouched by the decay that had claimed everything around it, was a single stone door, its surface entirely covered in dense, layered seal work unlike anything Naruto had ever seen. He stopped dead in the chamber entrance, staring at it. The seals weren't like the explosive tags he was used to, or even the more complex containment seals he'd occasionally glimpsed on scrolls. These were layered, dozens, maybe hundreds of individual seal formulas stacked and interwoven into a single, staggeringly complex whole, spiraling outward from a central point in a pattern that made his eyes water if he stared too long. It looked less like a lock and more like a living, breathing thing, frozen mid-motion, and it was glowing. Faintly. A soft, warm light pulsing in rhythm with the hum he'd been following since he first smelled salt water on the wind. "Okay," he said, voice small in the vast, dusty silence. "That's new." He approached slowly, every instinct screaming at him that this was important, that whatever lay behind that door mattered in a way he couldn't fully articulate yet. He reached out a hand, hesitating just before touching the surface. The moment his fingers made contact with the stone, the glow intensified sharply, seal lines flaring bright gold before rippling outward in a wave that swept across the entire door. Naruto yanked his hand back on instinct, stumbling a step, heart hammering, but the door didn't attack. It didn't collapse. Instead, with a deep, grinding groan that echoed through the ancient chamber like the settlement itself was exhaling after a decades-long held breath, the stone door began, slowly, to open. Dust billowed out from the widening gap, and Naruto coughed, waving a hand in front of his face, squinting into the darkness beyond. When the dust settled enough to see clearly, what lay beyond the door stole whatever breath he had left. It was a vault, not large, maybe the size of a modest room, but every surface within it was covered in the same dense, spiraling seal work as the door itself, carved directly into stone walls that seemed to glow faintly from within, like the light source had nothing to do with torches or windows and everything to do with the seals themselves. In the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, and atop it, protected by yet another layer of intricate sealing, sat a collection of scrolls, old, but remarkably preserved, their edges crisp despite what must have been years of isolation. Beside the scrolls sat something else, a simple, unadorned kunai, its blade a strange reddish metal Naruto didn't recognize, and a small, weathered journal bound in cracked leather. He stepped into the vault slowly, feeling the hum in his chakra network settle into something almost like contentment, like whatever had been pulling him here was satisfied he'd finally arrived. "This is..." He trailed off again, standing before the pedestal, staring at the scrolls. "This is a lot." He reached for the journal first. Something about the scrolls felt like they required more ceremony than he was ready for, but the journal seemed almost mundane by comparison, human in a way the towering seal work around him wasn't. He opened it carefully, dust falling from cracked pages, and found handwriting inside, neat, careful script, faded but legible. He couldn't read all of it clearly in the dim light, but a name at the top of the first page caught his eye immediately, and his stomach dropped. Property of the Uzumaki Clan Council. Sealed under the authority of Mito Uzumaki, first Jinchuriki of the Hidden Whirlpool. Mito Uzumaki, Naruto whispered. He knew that name, barely. A footnote in the history of the Ninetales Jinchuriki lineage, mentioned in passing by Jiraiya once, someone connected to the first Hokage. He hadn't known she was Uzumaki. He hadn't known there was a connection at all. He flipped forward through the journal's pages, skimming entries he only partially understood, references to the whirlpool discipline, to life force channeling distinct from sage arts, to chains that bind not just enemies, but chakra itself. Diagrams of seal formulas he didn't recognize, annotated in the margins with notes about stability and vessel capacity and air potential. One passage, more legible than the rest, stopped him cold. The Uzumaki clan's true strength was never merely our vitality, though the world remembers us for it. Our strength was always the marriage of that vitality to the discipline of sealing, chains drawn not from summoned toads or borrowed nature energy, but from the life force within our own blood, refined and channeled through fuinjutsu passed down since the clan's founding. This vault exists to preserve that discipline against the day our village falls, so that whichever heir survives may reclaim what the world tried to erase. Naruto read the passage 3 times, throat tight, hands trembling slightly around the fragile journal. The world tried to erase us, he murmured. What happened here? As if in answer, the seals lining the vault walls pulsed faintly, not aggressively, but like a held breath finally released, and a section of the wall near the pedestal, previously indistinguishable from the surrounding stone, began to shift, revealing a narrow alcove that hadn't been visible before. Inside the alcove, illuminated by the same soft internal glow as the rest of the vault, was something Naruto could only describe as a statue, the seated figure of a woman, carved with startling detail compared to the weathered, anonymous statuary he passed in the corridors outside. Long, flowing hair rendered in stone, hands folded in a seated meditation pose, dressed in modest, high-collared robes that covered her fully from wrist to ankle, the fabric carved to suggest layered, practical clothing rather than ceremonial finery. And her face, even carved in stone, even worn slightly by time, bore an unmistakable resemblance to the fleeting memory Naruto carried of his own mother. Mito? He guessed, stepping closer, voice barely above a whisper. The statue's stone eyes, impossibly, seemed to track his movement. Alright, quick breather before we go further. If this is giving you chills, drop a comment below, because writing this scene genuinely gave me chills too. This is the moment everything about Naruto's story starts to shift, and we're not even at the good part yet. Make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next in this vault is going to answer questions you didn't even know you had about where Naruto's power really comes from. Okay. Let's keep going. Naruto stumbled back a step, heart slamming against his ribs, as the stone statue's carved eyes shifted with slow, grinding precision to fix directly on him. Okay, that's not normal. Statues don't just. The statue's mouth moved. It wasn't speech, not exactly, more like the ghost of speech, a voice that seemed to emanate from the seal work covering every surface of the vault rather than from the stone figure itself, layered and resonant in a way that made the hair on Naruto's arms stand up. Blood of the whirlpool, the voice intoned, ancient and measured, carrying a weight that pressed against Naruto's chest like physical pressure. You have found what was left behind. Naruto swallowed hard, forcing himself to stand his ground despite every instinct screaming at him to bolt back through the vault door. What are you? Are you actually Mito Uzumaki? I am what remains of her intent, the voice answered, the statue's stone hands shifting slightly in its lap, an unnervingly organic motion for something carved from rock. A guardian construct, sealed with her memory and purpose, left to await an heir of sufficient blood and sufficient need. I am not her boy. But I remember what she wished for those who came after. An heir, Naruto repeated, something in his chest tightening at the word. Of what? What clan? What village? Uzushiogakure, the guardian said, and something in the resonance of that name seemed to echo through the vault itself, like the very stones remembered the weight of it. The Hidden Whirlpool Village, home of the Uzumaki clan, allies to the Hidden Leaf, masters of fuinjutsu unmatched in their era, and destroyed, generations ago, by a coalition of enemies who feared what our sealing mastery might one day become in the wrong hands, or the right ones. Naruto's mind reeled, trying to fit this enormous, unfamiliar history into whatever small fragments he'd already known. Destroyed. You mean, this whole place, all these ruins, that's from an actual war? Against my mom's clan? Kushina Uzumaki was among the last to escape before the final collapse, the guardian confirmed, and something in its tone, impossibly, carried a note that might have been grief, if stone could grieve. Sent to Konoha as a child, to preserve the bloodline, to preserve what she could of our legacy. She carried more of that legacy than even she likely understood. Naruto's hands curled into fists at his sides, something hot and complicated rising in his chest. Grief for a mother he'd never known, anger at a history he'd never been told, and underneath all of it, A strange, fragile thread of belonging he hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. Nobody ever told me any of this, he said quietly. Nobody in Konoha ever said a word about any of this. About her. About this place. Konoha's silence is not my concern, the guardian said, not unkindly, but with a bluntness that felt almost startling. My purpose is simpler. I exist to determine whether the blood that finds this vault carries the potential to reclaim what was lost, and if so, to begin what must be begun. Naruto straightened slightly, some old, stubborn instinct rising through the grief and confusion. And what exactly gets begun? The statue's carved eyes seemed to study him for a long, silent moment, weighing something Naruto couldn't quite name. You already carry it, boy, the guardian said finally. I felt it the moment you crossed into these ruins, chains stirring in your chakra network, seeking the discipline they were never taught to follow. 3 nights ago, buried and dying beneath collapsed stone, something in your blood woke on instinct alone, desperate enough to keep you breathing. That was only the barest fraction of what waits within you. Naruto's breath caught. He thought of the strange, fragmented flash of memory during those endless hours underground, a fleeting warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with Kurama's familiar, prickling heat, gone before he could fully register it. What waits within me? He asked, voice quieter now, almost afraid of the answer. The Uzumaki sage state, the guardian intoned, and the seals lining the vault walls flared brighter in unison, as though the very chamber itself was responding to the name. Not the borrowed harmony of nature energy that the toads of Mount Mayabo could teach, nor the summoned power of any external contract. A discipline born entirely from within, life force refined through generations of Fuinjutsu mastery, chains drawn not from enemies alone but from the wellspring of vitality unique to Uzumaki blood itself, a power your clan cultivated in secret, long before the rest of the world learned to fear us for it. Naruto stared at the statue, at the glowing seals surrounding him, at the fragile, ancient journal still clutched in his trembling hands, and felt something shift deep inside his chest, something that had been quietly, desperately hungry for exactly this moment without ever knowing it was hungry at all. Can you teach me? He asked, the question tumbling out before he'd even fully decided to ask it. Whatever this is, whatever I'm supposed to be able to do, can you actually teach me how to use it? The guardian was silent for a long moment, stone eyes unblinking, weighing him with a patience that felt older than anything Naruto had ever encountered. That is precisely why this vault exists, it said finally. But understand this clearly, before you commit to what comes next, what stirs in your blood is not a gift freely given. It demands discipline, patience, and control that your own impulsive nature will find difficult. The chains you carry can protect everything you love, or they can unravel you from the inside out, if approached carelessly. Mito Uzumaki did not survive to see this vault's purpose fulfilled. I will not fail her a second time by rushing an unworthy heir toward power he cannot control. Naruto squared his shoulders, something fierce and stubborn hardening behind his eyes, the same look that had carried him through years of being underestimated, dismissed, and now, apparently, abandoned. I've got nothing but time, he said quietly. And nowhere else to be. My team already thinks I'm dead. Something in the guardian's carved expression shifted at that, not quite surprise, but something adjacent to it, a recalibration of whatever assessment it had been making. Explain, it said simply. And so, standing alone in an ancient vault beneath the ruins of a village he'd never known existed, Naruto Uzumaki found himself telling the truth to a guardian carved from stone and memory, a truth he hadn't fully allowed himself to sit with until this exact moment. He told it about the ambush, about the ravine collapsing on top of him, about clawing his way free of the rubble, alone, 3 days ago, with no rescue team, no search party, nothing waiting for him but silence and forest. They left, he said, voice tight, staring down at his own hands rather than at the statue's ancient, patient face. Kakashi-sensei made the call. I get it, I do. The mission was falling apart, they were outnumbered, I probably looked dead. But they didn't even try to check. They just left. The guardian said nothing for a long moment, letting the words settle in the dusty silence of the vault. And this wounds you, it observed finally, not a question. Of course it wounds me. The words came out sharper than he intended, echoing off ancient stone. They're supposed to be my team, Sakura, Sasuke, Kakashi-sensei. I thought, after everything, after all the missions and the training and the fights we've survived together, I thought that actually meant something. And the second things got hard, they just... He cut himself off, jaw tight, blinking against the sudden, unwelcome burn behind his eyes. They just left me there. You have been left behind before, the Guardian said, and there was something almost gentle underneath the ancient weight of its voice now. I sense it in you. A wound far older than 3 days. Naruto let out a short, humorless laugh. Yeah. You could say that. Then hear this clearly, blood of the whirlpool, the Guardian continued, stone hands shifting again in that unnervingly organic way. Abandonment is not unfamiliar to our clan's history either. Uzushiogakure itself was abandoned by allies who valued their own safety over honoring old alliances. In the final hours of its destruction, Kushina Uzumaki was sent away from a dying village as a child, carrying grief no child should carry. Our clan's entire legacy is, in some sense, a legacy of being left to survive alone. And yet we endured, not despite that grief, but by transforming it into discipline, into strength, into a determination that outlasted every enemy who underestimated us. Naruto looked up slowly, meeting the statue's ancient stone eyes, something in his chest settling despite the raw ache still sitting there. So what, I'm just supposed to turn this into something useful? He asked. Just get over being left behind and make it into training fuel? I did not say it would be simple, the Guardian corrected. Grief is not something to discard, and I will not insult you by suggesting otherwise. But grief can be a foundation as easily as a wound, if you choose to build on it rather than be buried beneath it a second time. You have already proven, by surviving that ravine and finding your way to this vault, that you possess the will required. What remains is whether you possess the discipline to match it. Naruto stood a little straighter, something in the Guardian's blunt, ancient honesty settling more comfortably in his chest than any gentle sympathy might have. Then teach me, he said, firm this time, no hesitation in it. Whatever it takes. I'm not going back to Konoha as the guy who almost died in a ravine. If they're gonna think I'm dead for a while, fine, let 'em. I'm gonna use that time to actually become something worth coming back as. The Guardian regarded him for a long, silent moment, and then, slowly, the stone figure inclined its head, the barest suggestion of a nod. Then we begin, it said. But understand, boy, what stirred in your blood inside that ravine was instinct alone, desperate and uncontrolled. What I intend to teach you is discipline, and discipline, unlike instinct, cannot be forced. It must be earned piece by piece, no matter how much impatience burns in that stubborn heart of yours. Yeah, Naruto said, and for the first time since the ravine collapsed on top of him, something that almost resembled his usual grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. I've heard that one before. Doesn't usually stop me. No, the Guardian agreed, something in its ancient voice carrying a note that might, impossibly, have been the ghost of amusement. I suspect it does not. The Guardian directed him toward the scrolls resting atop the stone pedestal, carefully, reverently, explaining that these contained the foundational sealing theory upon which the entire Uzumaki sage discipline had been built centuries ago. Naruto unrolled the first one with hands that trembled slightly. Whether from exhaustion or anticipation, he couldn't quite say. The scroll's contents were dense, rows of formula notation interspersed with diagrams of chakra flow patterns unlike anything he'd studied under Kakashi, or even glimpsed in Jiraiya's more esoteric teachings. Spiraling lines representing chains, annotated with notes about life force channeling and vessel integrity, and controlled release thresholds. I have no idea what any of this means, Naruto admitted, squinting at a particularly dense diagram. Naturally, the Guardian said. You were never taught to read it. That, too, is part of what was stolen from you, a legacy your mother's clan intended for its heirs, denied by circumstances beyond any of our control. We will begin with the basics. Sit. Naruto lowered himself cross-legged onto the vault stone floor, scrolls spread across his knees, the ancient Guardian's stone gaze settling on him with patient, unwavering attention. Close your eyes, the Guardian instructed. Before you attempt to shape this power, you must first learn to feel it, separate from the fox's chakra you have grown accustomed to sensing. Reach inward, past the familiar heat of the Ninetales' presence. Deeper. To something quieter. Older. Something that has always been yours alone, long before any seal bound a demon to your body. Naruto closed his eyes, forcing his breathing to slow despite the exhaustion dragging at every limb, despite the hunger still gnawing quietly at his stomach, despite 3 days of grief and fear and stubborn, desperate walking finally catching up to him all at once. He reached inward, the way the guardian instructed, past Kurama's familiar, simmering presence, a heat he'd known intimately for years now, past that, into something he genuinely never noticed before, because he'd simply never had reason to look. A quieter warmth. Steadier. Older somehow, in a way that didn't quite make sense for a 13-year-old boy, but felt undeniably, unmistakably his in a way even Kurama's borrowed power never quite had. His breath caught. "I feel it," he whispered, eyes still closed, brow furrowed in concentration. It's small right now, but I feel it. It's warm." "Good," the guardian said, and something in its ancient voice carried real approval now, not merely patient assessment. "That warmth is the seed of everything Uzushiogakure once stood for. Life force, refined through generations of our clan's own blood, waiting to be shaped by the discipline your ancestors spent centuries perfecting. Hold that feeling. Do not force it. Simply hold it, and grow accustomed to its presence." Naruto sat in that ancient vault, eyes closed, exhausted and hungry and grieving and utterly alone, and for the first time since the ravine wall collapsed on top of him, felt something that wasn't quite hope, not yet, but was at least the fragile, stubborn beginning of it. Outside the vault, beyond the crumbling ruins of a village erased from every map Konoha still used, the sun continued its slow arc toward evening, indifferent to the quiet, world-altering moment unfolding in the darkness below. And somewhere far to the north, in a Konoha hospital room, Sakura Haruno sat by a window she wasn't really looking through, hands clenched in her lap, silently begging, impossibly. Naruto was still alive out there. She had no way of knowing just how right she was, or how much he was about to change. Exhaustion has a way of catching up all at once, doesn't it? You can outrun it for a while, adrenaline, willpower, sheer stubbornness, but eventually the bill comes due, usually at the worst possible moment. For Naruto, that moment arrived on his second night inside the vault. He'd spent the better part of the previous day sitting cross-legged on cold stone, following the guardian's patient instruction, reaching inward past Kurama's familiar heat toward that quieter, older warmth the guardian called the seed of the Uzumaki discipline. It was slow, frustrating work, the kind of meditative discipline that ran completely counter to every instinct in Naruto's body, which had spent 13 years solving problems by hitting them until they stopped being problems. Again, the guardian instructed, stone voice patient but unyielding. "You are grasping at it. Stop grasping. Simply notice it, the way you would notice warmth from a fire without needing to reach into the flames themselves." "I'm trying," Naruto muttered, sweat beating at his temple despite the vault's cool, still air. It keeps slipping away every time I think I've got it." "Because you are still trying to control it before you have learned to coexist with it," the guardian said. "Patience, boy. This is the first lesson, and the hardest one for someone of your temperament. It will not be the last time it frustrates you. If you've spent any time around Naruto, in this story or the original one, you already know patience has never exactly been his strong suit. But here's what's different about this moment, and I think it's worth sitting with for a second. There was no one here to perform for. No Sakura to impress, no Sasuke to compete against, no village watching and whispering behind his back. Just him, an ancient stone guardian, and the quiet, grinding work of actually learning something the hard way. By the time the vault's ambient light dimmed into whatever the ruins used in place of a day-night cycle, some subtle shift in the seal work's glow that the guardian explained mimicked the surface world's rhythm. Naruto's body had finally, completely run out of road. He hadn't eaten a proper meal in 3 days. He'd survived on unfamiliar berries, questionable stream water, and pure stubbornness, all while his body worked overtime healing catastrophic injuries and now, on top of that, straining to touch a completely unfamiliar wellspring of chakra for hours at a stretch. "You are fading," the guardian observed, watching him sway slightly where he sat. "Rest. This training cannot proceed on an empty, exhausted body. Even Uzumaki vitality has its limits, however generous those limits may be compared to most." "I'm fine," Naruto said, the words slurring slightly with fatigue even as he said them. I can keep going. You cannot, the guardian said, with the kind of flat, ancient certainty that didn't leave room for argument. There is a narrow passage behind this chamber leading toward what remains of the settlement's old cistern system. It should still hold clean water. Beyond that, there are preserved stores in an adjacent vault, sealed provisions meant to sustain any heir who found their way here. Eat. Rest. We resume when your body has recovered enough to make the attempt safely. Naruto wanted to argue. Some stubborn, wounded part of him wanted to push through on sheer willpower alone, the way he always had, the way that had carried him through every crisis since he was old enough to remember being alone. But his body had other plans. The moment he tried to stand, his vision swam, dark spots crowding the edges of his sight, and he had to catch himself against the stone pedestal to keep from collapsing outright. Boy, the guardian said, something almost gentle threading through its ancient voice now. There is no shame in rest. Even the strongest chains snap if pulled taut without pause. Eat. Sleep. The discipline will still be here when you wake. Naruto exhaled slowly, some of the fight draining out of his shoulders. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's probably smart. The adjacent vault the guardian mentioned turned out to be smaller than the main chamber, but no less remarkable. Rows of sealed clay containers lining stone shelves, each one marked with a small, precise seal formula that, according to the guardian, had preserved their contents indefinitely against decay. Naruto broke the seal on the nearest container with clumsy, exhausted fingers, and found dried fish, hardened rice cakes, and a few preserved vegetables inside. Nothing fancy, nothing close to the ramen he'd have killed for in that moment, but real food, and after 3 days of berries and desperation, it might as well have been a feast prepared by the finest cook in the land of fire. Wow, he mumbled between bites, examining the preserved fish with mild curiosity. Whirlpool cuisine relied heavily on the sea, the guardian explained. Fish, seaweed, rice. Our clan valued discipline in all things, including diet. A clear mind was considered essential to Fuinjutsu mastery, and rich, heavy foods were thought to dull focus. Guess that tracks. Naruto tore into another piece of dried fish, too hungry to care much about the history lesson at that exact moment. He found the cistern system shortly after, exactly where the guardian directed, a series of stone channels that had somehow kept clean, cold water flowing beneath the ruins for who knew how many decades. Fed by some underground spring the original architects had clearly engineered with the same meticulous discipline as everything else in this place. He drank until his stomach ached, splashed the cold water over his face and arms, washing away 3 days of dust, dried blood, and grime. For the first time since the ravine collapsed on top of him, he felt something close to human again. He slept that night in a small alcove off the main vault chamber, using his torn jacket as a makeshift pillow, the guardian's ancient, patient presence somehow reassuring in a way he wouldn't have expected from a talking statue just 2 days earlier. His dreams, when they came, were not peaceful. Here's where things start to shift, and I want you to pay close attention, because this next part matters more than it might seem at first. Naruto's sleep that night wasn't restful. His body, still healing from catastrophic injury, still adjusting to the strange new wellspring of chakra he'd spent all day trying to touch, slipped into something closer to a fever than genuine rest, restless, sweat-soaked, his chakra network humming at a frequency that had nothing to do with conscious effort anymore. In his dream, he stood once more at the edge of the ravine, rain hammering down exactly as it had the day of the ambush. But this time, the scene played differently. This time, he watched himself get buried from a distance, a strange, detached perspective, like he was a ghost watching his own near-death from just outside his body. He saw Kakashi's face, twisted with the impossible weight of command. He saw Sakura's scream. He saw Sasuke's flicker of horror, quickly buried beneath practiced composure. And he saw, with a clarity his waking mind hadn't quite processed yet, the exact moment his team turned and walked away, not out of malice, not even really out of cowardice, but out of a brutal, tactical calculus that simply hadn't included the possibility that he might still be alive beneath that rubble. They didn't even hesitate, dream Naruto thought, watching his own broken body vanish beneath collapsing stone. They just left. The dream shifted, the ravine dissolving into something older, a vast, sprawling village he somehow recognized despite never having seen it whole, its towers intact, its streets bustling with people bearing the same spiral crest stitched onto his own jacket. Uzushiogakure, alive and thriving, exactly as it must have looked before whatever war reduced it to the ruins he now called home. And then, just as quickly, he watched it burn. Not metaphorically, actually burn, towers collapsing under jutsu he didn't recognize, screams echoing through streets that would, generations later, lie silent and empty beneath salt wind and encroaching vines. He saw, in fragmented, dreamlike flashes, figures fighting desperately against overwhelming numbers, spiral-crested defenders falling one after another against a coalition of enemies who decided, collectively, that the Uzumaki clan's sealing mastery was too dangerous to let survive. Left behind, a voice whispered through the burning dream, not the guardian's voice, something older and rawer, buried deep in blood memory passed down through generations, abandoned by allies who valued their own safety. Left to burn while the rest of the world simply walked away. Naruto's dream self clenched his fists, something hot and furious rising in his chest that had nothing to do with the fever racking his sleeping body and everything to do with a grief that stretched back further than his own 13 years of life, a grief belonging to an entire clan, an entire village, an entire bloodline that had learned, over and over again, exactly what it felt like to be left to die alone. Never again, the voice whispered, and Naruto felt something deep in his chakra network respond to that whisper with a violence that startled even his dreaming mind. Never again will an Uzumaki be left to die because no one thought to look back. The chains came first in the dream, golden red, blazing with barely contained heat, erupting from his back in a violent cascade that shattered the burning village around him into fragments of light. He felt power surge through him unlike anything he'd ever touched before, raw and vast and utterly, terrifyingly uncontrolled. And then he woke up screaming, because the chains weren't just in the dream anymore. If you've been enjoying this series, now's a great time to smash that like button, because what happens next in this chapter is genuinely one of my favorite scenes I've written for this channel. Let's keep going. Naruto's eyes snapped open in the darkness of the vault alcove, and the first thing he registered was heat, an overwhelming, blistering heat radiating from somewhere behind his shoulder blades, so intense it felt like his entire back had caught fire. The second thing he registered was sound, a deep, grinding crack, stones splitting somewhere close by, followed by a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through his entire skeleton. He scrambled upright, disoriented, chest heaving, and looked down at his own hands to find them glowing, a faint, golden-red light pulsing beneath his skin, tracing patterns that looked disturbingly like the seal work covering every surface of the vault around him. Script-like markings crawled slowly across his forearms, intricate and precise, as though his own skin had suddenly decided to become a canvas for Fuinjutsu formulas he'd never studied. What? His voice came out ragged, panicked. What's happening? What is this? Behind him, something tore. He spun around just in time to see two enormous chains erupt from his back, shattering the fabric of his already torn jacket, blazing with the same golden-red light as the markings on his skin. They moved with terrifying, independent, not the controlled, deliberate motion he'd have expected from a jutsu, but something wilder, almost feral, lashing out toward the alcove stone walls with enough force to crack solid rock on impact. Whoa, whoa! Naruto stumbled backward, nearly losing his footing as the chains whipped past his head close enough to stir his hair. Okay, that's a lot, that's way too much, how do I? The vault's ambient light flared violently in response to the eruption, seal work along every surface blazing bright gold, and a moment later the guardian's voice thundered through the chamber with an urgency Naruto hadn't heard from it before. Boy! Cease struggling against it. You will tear something vital if you fight the chains directly in this state. I'm not trying to fight them, they're just... One of the chains lashed backward unexpectedly, catching Naruto across the shoulder hard enough to send him sprawling into the alcove's stone wall, breath knocked out of him. The pain seemed to focus something, if only for a moment, a flash of clarity cutting through the chaotic surge of unfamiliar chakra flooding his system. But it didn't last. The chains, sensing no clear direction, no disciplined control to guide them, simply reacted to the raw emotional storm still churning from his fever dream, grief, fury, the aching wound of abandonment, all bleeding directly into chakra that had no framework yet for restraint. Your emotional state is feeding directly into the chains without filter, the Guardian's voice cut through the vault. Stone form emerging from the main chamber with startling speed for something built from solid rock. This is precisely the danger I warned you of. Uncontrolled, this power does not distinguish between enemy and ally, wall and open air. It simply responds to the raw force of what you are feeling. Then tell me how to stop it. Naruto shouted, ducking as another wild lash of chain cracked through the alcove ceiling, sending a rain of loose stone fragments down around him. You cannot stop it through force, the Guardian said, stone hands raised toward him in a gesture that might have been meant to be reassuring. If reassurance were something a stone construct could convincingly project in the middle of a crisis. Force is what is driving it. You must find calm at the center of the storm, the same stillness we practiced yesterday, however impossible that feels in this exact moment. Calm? There are literal chains coming out of my back, how am I supposed to? One of the chains, as if punctuating his own panic, slammed into the alcove's outer wall with enough force to crack a support beam clean through, sending a shower of debris cascading down. Naruto threw himself sideways to avoid being crushed, rolling across the stone floor, heart hammering, the golden red script still crawling across his skin like something alive and searching. Breathe, the Guardian said, voice suddenly, deliberately quieter, cutting through the chaos with a calm that felt almost jarring against the violence surrounding them both. I know it feels impossible. Breathe anyway. Find the warmth we touched yesterday, not the fury feeding these chains now, but the quiet seed beneath it. It is still there, Naruto. Buried under the storm, but still there. Something about the Guardian using his actual name, not boy, not blood of the whirlpool, but his actual name, cut through the panic just enough for him to try. He forced his breathing to slow, even as chains continued lashing wildly around him. Even as the alcove's ceiling groaned ominously overhead, even as every instinct screamed at him to fight back against something he couldn't fight because it was coming from inside his own body. Quiet warmth, he thought, grasping for the memory of yesterday's meditation like a lifeline. Not the fire. Not the fury. Just warmth. He thought of his mother's face, glimpsed only once in a desperate, fading memory. Not the burning village from his fever dream. Not the grief and rage of a clan destroyed by allies who'd walked away, but simply her face, warm and fierce and proud, the way she'd looked in that single, precious flash of memory Kurama had once shown him. She wouldn't want this, he thought, forcing the words to settle even as chains continued their violent thrashing around him. She wouldn't want me tearing this place apart because I'm scared and angry. She'd want me to control it. To be worthy of it. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, over the course of several long, harrowing minutes, the chain's movement began to shift. Not stopping entirely, not yet, but slowing, the wild, feral lashing gradually settling into something closer to restless twitching, still powerful, still barely leashed, but no longer actively trying to demolish the alcove around him. Good, the Guardian breathed, and for the first time, Naruto heard something like genuine relief in that ancient stone voice. Good boy. Hold on to that. Do not release the tension entirely. Simply guide it, the way you would guide a wild animal too frightened to be handled roughly. Naruto, sweat-soaked and trembling, sat in the center of the wrecked alcove, chains still hovering restlessly at his back, glowing script still crawling faintly across his skin, and slowly, carefully, breathed. It took nearly an hour of careful, exhausting concentration, of the Guardian's patient, unwavering guidance. Of Naruto forcing himself back from the edge of panic every time the chains flared unpredictably in response to some fresh spike of fear or frustration, before the golden red light finally began to recede. The script-like markings on his skin faded first, sinking back beneath the surface like ink dissolving into water. The chains followed shortly after, retracting slowly back into whatever hidden reservoir of chakra they'd erupted from, until finally, with a final shudder that left Naruto gasping and drenched in sweat, they vanished entirely. He sat in the wreckage of the alcove, cracked walls, a partially collapsed ceiling, debris scattered everywhere, and simply breathed for a long moment, chest heaving, hands shaking against his knees. Okay, he finally managed, voice hoarse. That was not what I expected training day 2 to look like. No, the Guardian agreed, stone form settling back into something closer to its usual composed stillness, though Naruto could have sworn there was still tension threaded through its ancient voice. Nor what I expected, if I am honest. The chains typically manifest gradually, under controlled circumstances, guided carefully by an instructor from the earliest stages. What triggered this eruption was unusual. Naruto ran a hand through sweat-damp hair, wincing at a fresh bruise along his shoulder where the chain had caught him earlier. It was a dream, he admitted quietly. About the village. Uzushiogakure. I saw it burning. I saw it get attacked, and I felt this anger, this grief, like it wasn't even really mine, but it was, somehow, all at once. The guardian was quiet for a long moment, considering this. Blood memory, it said finally. A phenomenon our clan understood but rarely discussed openly. Certain traumas, certain grief, passed down not through spoken history alone but woven somehow into the chakra itself, inherited alongside the discipline. It appears your body's proximity to this vault, combined with your own recent trauma of abandonment, triggered a resonance with older, deeper wounds belonging to this clan as a whole. Naruto swallowed hard, something uncomfortable settling in his chest at the idea that grief could be inherited like that, passed down through blood the same way chakra was, waiting dormant until circumstance called it forward. So what, every time I get upset, chains are just gonna start ripping out of my back? He asked, only half joking. Not if you learn control, the guardian said firmly. What happened tonight was dangerous, yes, but it was also instructive. You proved something important, even in the midst of an uncontrolled eruption, even flooded with grief and fury beyond your capacity to process. You were still able to find enough stillness to guide the chains back. That is no small thing, Naruto. Many who first touch this discipline are consumed entirely by the initial surge, unable to regain control until the chakra exhausts itself naturally, often at great cost to their own body. Great, Naruto muttered. So I could have, hurt myself pretty badly just now. Yes, the guardian said bluntly, no attempt to soften the truth. Uncontrolled chain eruptions of this magnitude have, historically, caused severe internal damage to those unprepared for them, torn chakra pathways, in the worst cases, life-threatening exhaustion. That you emerged from this with only bruises and a damaged alcove speaks to considerable natural aptitude, and no small amount of stubborn will. But we cannot rely on aptitude and stubbornness alone going forward. This must never happen again without proper preparation. Naruto nodded slowly. The reality of just how dangerous tonight had been finally settling in past the adrenaline. Yeah, okay. So what do we do differently? The guardian, after a long moment of consideration, shifted its teaching approach entirely. We begin tomorrow with grounding exercises before any attempt to touch the chakra itself, it explained, guiding Naruto back toward the main vault chamber, away from the wreckage of the alcove. Physical discipline first, controlled breathing, meditation techniques designed specifically to separate emotional response from chakra manipulation. Only once you can maintain calm under provocation will we return to actually touching the sage state directly. That sounds like it's gonna take a while, Naruto said, unable to fully keep the impatience out of his voice despite everything that had just happened. It will take exactly as long as it takes, the guardian said, not unkindly, but with a firmness that brooked no argument. You very nearly injured yourself severely tonight, boy. I understand your urgency. I understand the wound driving it, the abandonment fueling your desire to become powerful enough that it never happens again. But urgency without discipline is precisely what almost tore your own chakra pathways apart an hour ago. If you wish to honor what this vault represents, if you wish to honor your mother's legacy and the clan that built this discipline, you will learn patience alongside power. One without the other is simply a disaster waiting to happen. Naruto was quiet for a long moment, the guardian's words settling uncomfortably against his own stubborn instincts. But underneath the frustration, he recognized the truth in it, recognized, with a clarity that surprised him, that tonight's eruption had been genuinely terrifying, not just for what it might have done to the vault, but for how close he'd come to seriously hurting himself before he'd even understood what was happening. Yeah, he said finally, quieter now. Yeah, okay. Grounding exercises first. Whatever it takes. Good, the guardian said, something like approval warming its ancient voice. Rest now, what remains of the night. Tomorrow, we begin properly, and this time, with the discipline this power actually deserves. While Naruto settled into an uneasy, exhausted sleep back in the vault's main chamber, chains quiet now, Script faded from his skin. Nothing but bone-deep fatigue left in the aftermath of the night's chaos. Let's check in on the people who left him behind. 2 days' travel north, at the fallback rendezvous point Kakashi had designated, a retrieval team had finally been dispatched from Konoha. Tsunade herself had authorized it the moment Kakashi's initial report reached her desk. A report that had, by all accounts, left the Hokage furious in a way few in the tower had seen before. You left him, she'd said flatly, according to the handful of shinobi present in her office that day, her voice carrying a dangerous quiet that was somehow more frightening than shouting would have been. You left a member of your team buried under a ravine collapse without confirming his condition. Hokage-sama, the tactical situation, Kakashi had started. I am aware of the tactical situation, Kakashi. I read your report. Tsunade's hands had flattened against her desk, knuckles white with barely contained fury. I am also aware that Naruto Uzumaki has survived situations that should have killed him several times over. You of all people should know better than to assume the worst without confirmation. Kakashi hadn't argued further. What was there to argue? He'd made the call he believed necessary in the moment, and he'd live with the consequences of that call regardless of how this ended. But something in Tsunade's fury had settled into his own chest as a quiet, persistent guilt he hadn't quite managed to shake in the days since. Sakura, for her part, had barely spoken since the retreat. She'd thrown herself into preparation for the retrieval mission with a grim, focused intensity that worried Kakashi more than her earlier grief had, the quiet, controlled fury of someone determined not to fail a second time. I should have fought harder to go back immediately, she told Sasuke quietly, the night before the retrieval team departed, staring at nothing in particular across their small camp. I should have refused the order. It wouldn't have changed anything, Sasuke had said, uncharacteristically gentle in his bluntness. We were outnumbered. Going back immediately might have gotten all of us killed, and we still wouldn't have known if he was even alive under all that rock. That doesn't make it feel any better, Sakura had said, voice tight. No, Sasuke had agreed. It doesn't. Now, 2 days later, the retrieval team, Kakashi, Sakura, Sasuke, and 2 additional Konoha shinobi assigned by Tsunade specifically for the search, approached the ravine where the ambush had taken place, tension thick enough to taste in the humid morning air. What they found, when they finally reached the collapsed section of the ravine wall, stopped every one of them cold. The rubble had been disturbed, not by rescue efforts, not by scavengers, but from within, a rough, jagged gap carved through the collapsed stone from the inside out, exactly the shape and size of someone dragging themselves free of a burial that should, by any reasonable measure, have been fatal. He got out, Sakura breathed, dropping to her knees beside the gap, fingers tracing the disturbed rock with something between disbelief and desperate hope. Kakashi-sensei, he got out, he's alive. There's no body, Kakashi confirmed grimly, crouching to examine the scene with his sharp, practiced eye. No blood trail significant enough to suggest he didn't survive the escape. Whatever happened here, Naruto walked away from it under his own power. Then where is he? Sasuke asked, scanning the surrounding treeline, something tight and urgent in his usually composed voice. It's been 5 days. If he's alive and mobile, why hasn't he made it back to Konoha, or at least toward a friendly outpost? Nobody had an answer to that. And as the retrieval team fanned out to search the surrounding area, following whatever faint traces of a trail they could find leading away from the ravine, traces that, unbeknownst to any of them, led steadily southeast, toward salt air and forgotten ruins none of them had any reason to suspect existed, the weight of 5 unexplained, unaccounted for days settled heavily over all of them. Wherever Naruto was, whatever had happened to him since the ravine collapsed, one thing had become brutally clear: he was alive. But he clearly wasn't coming home. Not yet. Morning in the vault didn't look like morning anywhere else in the world. There was no sunrise, no birdsong, nothing but the ambient seal light along the walls gradually brightening in a slow, deliberate rhythm that the Guardian had explained mimicked the surface's day-night cycle, a small mercy built into the vault's design by whoever had constructed it, so that anyone sheltering here wouldn't lose all sense of time. Naruto woke stiff and sore, bruises still tender along his shoulder from where the chain had caught him the night before, and for a long moment he simply lay there on the stone floor, staring up at the faintly glowing ceiling, replaying everything that had happened. Chains ripping out of my back. almost bringing the whole alcove down. A voice in my head that felt like it belonged to an entire dead village. Yeah, he muttered to himself, sitting up slowly, wincing. Definitely not what I thought training was gonna look like. The Guardian was already waiting when he shuffled back into the main chamber, stone form settled in its usual seated position near the pedestal, ancient eyes tracking his approach with the same patient, unhurried attention it always carried. You slept longer than I expected, it observed. Good. Your body needed it more than you likely realize. Yeah, well, tearing a hole in a wall with chains coming out of my own back will do that to a guy. Naruto rolled his shoulder, testing the bruise. So, grounding exercises. Where do we start? Before we start anything, the Guardian said, you deserve to understand what you are actually inheriting. Last night you asked what waits within you. I gave you the barest outline. Today, you should know the full weight of it, the history behind this discipline, and why it was buried so carefully in the first place. Naruto settled onto the stone floor across from the Guardian, some of his usual restless energy quieting into genuine attention. If there was one thing that could hold his focus even through exhaustion and grief, it was a story about who he actually was, a subject Konoha had always kept frustratingly vague. Uzushiogakure was never a large village, the Guardian began, voice settling into the measured cadence of something that had told this story, or some version of it, many times before, to heirs who never actually arrived to hear it. Smaller than Konoha, smaller even than some of the lesser hidden villages. But size was never the source of our influence. Our clan's mastery of Fuinjutsu was without equal, sealing techniques so refined that other villages, even allied ones, grew uneasy at the thought of what such mastery might accomplish if turned toward conquest rather than defense. But you guys didn't want to conquer anybody, right? Naruto asked. I mean, from what I've heard, the Uzumaki clan was allied with Konoha. My mom's clan and the first Hokage's clan were basically family, weren't they? Correct, the Guardian confirmed. The bond between the Senju and Uzumaki clans ran deep. Mito Uzumaki's marriage to Hashirama Senju, the first Hokage, cemented an alliance built on mutual respect rather than mere convenience. We had no ambitions of conquest. We simply wished to perfect our craft, protect our people, and honor the alliances we valued. But fear does not require ambition to justify itself, only the possibility of one. The Guardian's stone hands shifted slightly in its lap, and something in its ancient voice, impossibly, carried the weight of genuine old grief. A coalition formed against us, several villages, threatened by rumors and exaggerations of what our sealing techniques might one day be capable of, decided the safest course was simply to ensure Uzushiogakure could never grow strong enough to matter. They struck without formal declaration, overwhelming our defenses through sheer numbers rather than superior skill, and burned the village to the ground over the course of a single, brutal assault. And Konoha didn't help, Naruto said quietly. It wasn't really a question. Konoha's aid arrived too late to matter, the Guardian said, and there was no bitterness in its tone, only the flat, weary honesty of something that had made its peace with a wound centuries ago, even if the peace was imperfect. Whether through failures of communication, the chaos of the era, or simple military reality, by the time reinforcements reached our shores, there was little left to reinforce. Mito Uzumaki, married into Konoha by that point, survived the era but carried the grief of her homeland's destruction for the remainder of her life. It was she who commissioned this vault, and the others like it, scattered wherever surviving Uzumaki bloodlines might one day wander, to ensure that whatever the world took from us, our discipline would not be lost entirely. Naruto sat with that for a long moment, turning it over. It didn't fully surprise him. Abandonment, in one form or another, had been the through line of his entire life, and hearing that it stretched back generations, woven into the very history of the blood running through his veins, felt less like a shock and more like a grim confirmation of something he'd always half suspected. So Mito built this place, he said slowly, hoping that someday, somebody like me would show up. Precisely, the Guardian said. She could not know who or when, or under what circumstances, but she believed, fiercely, until her final breath, that the Uzumaki bloodline would endure, scattered as it became, and that whoever carried it forward deserved the chance to reclaim what history tried to erase. If you're finding this backstory as fascinating as I did writing it, let me know down in the comments. I did a genuinely deep dive into Uzushiogakure lore for this series, and there's more of it coming. For now, let's get back to the vault, because Naruto's got a question the Guardian's been waiting for. Okay, so, Naruto said, shifting where he sat, restless energy creeping back and now that the heavier history had settled somewhat. You keep calling yourself a Guardian. A construct. But you talk like you actually remember being her. Are you Mito, or aren't you? The Guardian was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with what felt like genuine care rather than evasion. I am a difficult thing to categorize simply, it said finally. When Mito Uzumaki commissioned this vault, she did not merely leave behind scrolls and preserved provisions. She poured a portion of her own chakra, her own memories, her own intent, into a construct designed specifically to evaluate and guide whichever heir eventually found their way here. I carry her voice, her knowledge, a great deal of her personality and judgment, but I am not truly her, in the sense of possessing her continued consciousness, her ongoing thoughts beyond the moment of my creation. I am, perhaps, best understood as an echo shaped with extraordinary precision, everything she wished to pass down, given just enough independent judgment to adapt to whatever heir eventually arrived, rather than delivering a single, rigid lesson regardless of circumstance. So you can, think for yourself? Not just repeat whatever she recorded? Within limits, yes, the Guardian confirmed. I have adjusted my teaching approach twice already since you arrived, first when I recognized the depth of your grief regarding your team's departure, and again last night, when your chains erupted with a violence beyond what Mito's original instructions anticipated. A purely rigid recording could not have made those adjustments. I am something more flexible than that, even if I remain, at my core, bound to the purpose she designed me for. Naruto considered this, some of his earlier apprehensions softening into something closer to genuine curiosity. Do you get tired of waiting? However long you've been down here, just sitting in the dark, waiting for somebody to show up? The Guardian's stone eyes seemed to study him for a long moment before it answered. I do not experience time the way you do, boy. I am dormant between arrivals, aware only in fragments, called fully into awareness by the proximity of qualifying blood. From my perspective, only a handful of such awakenings have occurred since Mito's original construction, a scattering of distant Uzumaki descendants who wandered close enough to trigger the vault's recognition, though none, until now, carried sufficient bloodline purity and genuine need to warrant full activation. Wait, there were others? Naruto sat up straighter. Other people who found this place before me? A handful, the Guardian confirmed. None remained long enough to complete meaningful training. Distant relations, mostly. Enough Uzumaki blood to stir the vault's recognition, but not enough resonance, or need, or will, to warrant the full awakening you triggered upon your arrival. You are, in the truest sense available to me, the first heir in generations capable of actually reclaiming what this discipline was built to preserve. Something in that statement settled heavily in Naruto's chest. Not quite pride, not exactly, but something adjacent to it. For 13 years, he'd been the demon brat, the outsider, the kid nobody wanted around. And now, in the quiet dark beneath a village that no longer existed on any map, something ancient and patient was telling him he was precisely what it had been waiting centuries to find. No pressure, he muttered, and something in his voice suggested he was only half joking. There is pressure, undeniably, the Guardian said, with a bluntness that had become almost comforting in its consistency. I will not pretend otherwise. But there is also opportunity here unlike anything offered to those who came before you, the chance to genuinely restore what your ancestors built, rather than simply carrying a fragment of it forward in obscurity. Whether that is a burden or a gift depends, I suspect, largely on how you choose to carry it. They began the grounding exercises shortly after, and here's where the pace of this chapter shifts a bit, because unlike the explosive chaos of last night, today was about something much quieter, much slower, and honestly, much harder for someone with Naruto's temperament to sit through. The Guardian had him sit cross-legged in the center of the vault chamber, spine straight, hands resting on his knees, and instructed him simply to breathe, no reaching for chakra, no attempting to touch the sage state at all, just controlled, deliberate breathing meant to establish a baseline of calm the Guardian could then deliberately disrupt. I am going to provoke you, the Guardian warned before they began. Not out of cruelty, but necessity. You must learn to maintain control of your chakra even when your emotional state is deliberately destabilized, because the world outside this vault will not wait politely for you to find your center before testing you. Wait, provoke me how? Kakashi made a tactical decision to protect two other members of his team, the Guardian said flatly, without preamble, and you were the cost of that decision. Naruto's breath caught, something hot flaring immediately in his chest, and he felt, faintly, an answering warmth stir at his back, chains beginning to respond to the sudden spike of anger before he even consciously registered feeling it. Hey, that's not, he started, jaw tight. Breathe, the Guardian said, calm and unhurried despite the provocation it had just deliberately delivered. Notice the anger. Do not suppress it, do not deny it, simply notice it exists, separate from the chains it is trying to summon. You are not your anger. You are the one observing it. Naruto forced a slow breath through gritted teeth, the warmth at his back subsiding slightly, though not entirely. This feels like a really messed up way to train. It is an effective way to train, the Guardian corrected. Again. And so it went, for the better part of that day, the Guardian deliberately prodding at every wound Naruto carried, watching for the moment his chakra responded to the provocation, guiding him back towards stillness each time, over and over, patient and relentless in equal measure. Your team believed you were dead, and yet made no serious effort to confirm it before retreating. Breath. Notice the anger. Let it pass without feeding the chains. The village that raised you spent years treating you as a burden rather than a child. Breath. Notice the grief underneath the anger. Let it pass. Your mother died before she ever held you. Your father sealed a demon into your infant body and then died as well, leaving you to face the consequences of both choices entirely alone. That one hit harder than the rest, and for a moment the chains flared visibly at his back, script crawling faintly along his forearms before he managed, through sheer effort of will, to wrestle the surge back under control. Good, the Guardian said quietly, once the golden red light had faded again. That was closer to losing control than any of the previous provocations. But you recovered it. That recovery, Naruto, that is the entire discipline in miniature. Not the absence of pain, but the capacity to hold it without letting it consume everything around you. Naruto sat there, breathing hard, sweat beading along his hairline despite having done nothing more physically demanding than sitting still all day. This is exhausting, he admitted. Way more exhausting than actual training usually is. Emotional discipline often is, the Guardian said, something almost like sympathy in its ancient voice. It is, in many ways, harder than any physical technique you have ever learned, precisely because there is no external enemy to strike. The enemy, in this exercise, is entirely internal. Let's take a quick break from the vault and check in on Team 7, because things are moving on their end too, and I don't want to leave you hanging on that thread. 2 days into their search from the ravine, Kakashi's team had found exactly nothing, no further trace of Naruto's trail beyond the first few hundred meters from the collapse, where hard earth and thick forest floor had swallowed any further sign of passage. Sakura had grown increasingly frantic with each dead end, pushing the search further than strict mission parameters technically allowed, until finally Kakashi called a halt at a small clearing to regroup and reassess. We can't just keep wandering blind, Kakashi said, unrolling a map across a flat stone, his single visible eye scanning the terrain markings with the focused intensity of someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. If he's alive and mobile, and he's not heading toward Konoha or any of the friendly outposts along this route, then either he's disoriented, injured badly enough to be moving erratically, or he's heading somewhere specific. Sasuke finished, arms crossed, staring at the map over Kakashi's shoulder. What's southeast of here? Kakashi's finger traced the map, following the rough direction of the last confirmed traces of the trail, and stopped on a stretch of coastline marked with old, faded lettering that most modern maps had long since stopped bothering to label clearly. Former territory of the land of whirlpools, he said slowly. Nothing official out there anymore. The old village that used to sit on that coast was destroyed generations ago. There shouldn't be anything left worth heading toward. Then why would he go there? Sakura asked, crouching beside the map, brow furrowed. Maybe he wouldn't, on purpose, Kakashi said. Could be nothing more than disorientation, wandering toward the smell of open water without any real destination in mind. Sasuke was quiet for a moment, something calculating behind his dark eyes. Or maybe there's something out there he doesn't even know he's being drawn toward. Nobody had an answer for that, and the silence that followed carried a weight none of them fully wanted to examine too closely. We keep moving southeast, Kakashi said finally, rolling the map back up. Whatever's drawing him that direction, we follow the only lead we've got. Sakura nodded, some of the frantic edge in her expression settling into grim, focused determination. Then let's move. Every day we spend arguing about direction is a day he's out there alone. If she'd known, in that moment, exactly what Naruto had already begun to become in the ruins waiting for them at the end of that trail, I don't think even her considerable imagination could have prepared her for it. Back in the vault, evening, or whatever passed for evening beneath the seal-light ceiling, arrived with Naruto thoroughly drained, but for the first time since his arrival, genuinely proud of the progress he'd made. The provocations had grown gradually less effective over the course of the day, his ability to notice and release each surge of grief or anger improving incrementally with every repetition. You have made real progress today, the Guardian said, as Naruto finally slumped back against the stone wall, utterly spent. Tomorrow, we will begin combining this emotional discipline with the actual chakra-touching exercises from 2 nights ago. Slowly. Carefully. With considerably more structure than your body provided on its own during that unfortunate eruption. Can't wait, Naruto said, though there was less sarcasm in it than there might have been a few days earlier. Hey, can I ask you something else? Something not about training? You may ask. Do you know anything else about my mom? Like, not just the clan stuff. Actually her. What she was like. The Guardian was quiet for a long moment, and when it spoke again, something in its ancient voice had softened considerably. Kushina Uzumaki was sent to Konoha as a young child, before Uzushiogakures' final destruction, to be raised in relative safety and to eventually serve as the village's second Jinchuriki, following in Mito's own footsteps. She was fierce, famously so, known throughout her academy years for a temper that earned her something of a fearsome reputation among her peers. She loved this clan's legacy deeply, even raised largely apart from it, and grieved the destruction of Uzushiogakure long after most assumed she should have moved past it. She was, by every account preserved in this vault's records, someone who refused to accept that grief meant weakness, or that loss meant surrender. Naruto felt something tighten in his throat, listening to that description, recognizing, uncomfortably and warmly all at once, pieces of himself in every detail. Sounds like we would have gotten along, he said quietly. I suspect you would have gotten along extraordinarily well, the Guardian agreed. And I suspect, watching you these past few days, that she would be considerably proud of the boy currently sitting in the ruins of everything she lost, determined to rebuild it rather than simply mourn it. Naruto didn't trust himself to respond to that right away, throat too tight, something warm and aching sitting heavy in his chest. He simply nodded, staring down at his own hands that, just the night before, had been covered in ancient script, wrapped in chains blazing with power older than the village he'd grown up in. I'm gonna get this right, he said finally, voice quiet but absolutely certain. Whatever it takes. I'm gonna make this discipline mine, properly, the way she would have wanted. And when I finally go back to Konoha, he stopped himself, some old, familiar bitterness creeping back into his voice. When I finally go back, he continued quieter now, it's not gonna be as the guy they left behind. It's gonna be as somebody they should have never doubted in the first place. The Guardian regarded him for a long, silent moment, ancient stone eyes carrying something that might, in a living face, have been described as quiet, fierce approval. Then let us make certain, it said, that when that day comes, you are entirely ready for it. The next several days settled into something that almost resembled a routine, if you could call anything happening in a buried ancient vault beneath the ruins of a destroyed village a routine. Naruto woke with the dim brightening of the seal-light ceiling, ate whatever preserved provisions remained in the storage vault, drank his fill from the cistern system, and then spent the bulk of each day locked in increasingly demanding sessions with the Guardian. Sessions that had evolved considerably from the raw provocation exercises of a few days earlier into something far more structured. Okay, Naruto said one morning, cracking his knuckles, settling into his now familiar cross-legged position in the center of the vault chamber. So today we're actually doing it. Actually touching the chains on purpose instead of just, surviving them by accident. Today we begin the process, the Guardian corrected, stone form settled in its usual seated posture nearby. Understand clearly. What you experienced during your uncontrolled eruption was the chains responding to raw emotional force, entirely without structure. What we build today is fundamentally different. We are not simply summoning the same power again. We are teaching you to shape it from the very first spark, so that control is built into the technique's foundation rather than imposed after the fact. Right. Foundation first. Got it. Naruto rolled his shoulders, some of his usual restless energy barely contained beneath an outward attempt at patience that, credit where it's due, had genuinely improved over the past several days of grounding exercises. Close your eyes, the Guardian instructed. Find the warmth. Not the fury that drove the eruption 3 nights ago, the quiet warmth beneath it, the one we touched together on your very first attempt. You know the way there now. Go slowly. Naruto closed his eyes, breathing settling into the pattern he practiced dozens of times over the past few days, reaching inward past Kurama's familiar, simmering heat toward that older, quieter wellspring the Guardian called the seed of the Uzumaki discipline. It came easier this time, not effortless, not yet, but easier, like a path worn slightly smoother by repeated travel. I've got it, he murmured, eyes still closed, brow furrowed in concentration. It feels bigger than last time. Like it's been waiting. It has been waiting, the Guardian confirmed. Generations of waiting, in truth, though it has only had you specifically to respond to for these past several days. Now, and this is critical, so listen carefully, do not simply grasp for more of it, the way instinct will urge you to. Instead, imagine drawing only the smallest possible thread of that warmth forward, like pulling a single strand from a much larger skein of yarn. Naruto concentrated, forcing himself to resist the urge to simply reach for as much power as he could grab all at once, an urge that, if you know anything about Naruto's personality, does not come naturally to him in the slightest. A faint warmth bloomed at the base of his spine, gentle this time, nothing like the violent eruption of days before. He felt it spread slowly outward, tracing pathways through his chakra network that felt simultaneously foreign and unmistakably, deeply familiar, like remembering the layout of a house he'd never actually visited. I feel it moving, he said quietly, careful not to break his concentration. It's not fighting me this time. Because you are not fighting it, the Guardian said, something like quiet satisfaction in its ancient voice. You are guiding a single thread rather than demanding the whole. Now, slowly, carefully, allow that thread to reach toward your hands. Naruto held that image in his mind, breathing steady, guiding the warmth outward through his arms toward his open palms resting on his knees. Slowly, gradually, a faint golden-red glow began to trace along his forearms, not the violent, sprawling script of his uncontrolled eruption, but something contained, deliberate, tracing a single clean line from shoulder to wrist. He opened his eyes to find a thin, glowing thread of chakra extending from his palm, hovering in the air like a single strand of luminous string, no thicker than a length of ninja wire. Whoa, he breathed, staring at it. That's way more manageable than a giant chain trying to tear through a wall. Precisely the point, the Guardian said. This is the discipline as it was meant to be practiced. A single thread, fully controlled, is infinitely more valuable in the early stages than an uncontrolled flood of power. Hold it there. Do not let it grow. Simply hold it, and become accustomed to its presence in the open air, separate from your own body. Naruto held the thread, sweat beading at his temple with the effort of restraint being, historically, not exactly his strongest suit. But minute by minute, he found the effort easier, the thread stabilizing into something almost peaceful, humming faintly in the quiet chamber. Excellent, the Guardian said, after several long minutes had passed. You may release it now. Naruto let the thread dissolve, the faint golden-red glow fading back beneath his skin, and let out a long breath, some genuine pride breaking through his exhaustion. That felt completely different from the other night, he said. Like, actually manageable. Because you approached it with discipline rather than desperation, the Guardian said. This is only the first thread of many you will eventually learn to call forward. But it is the foundation upon which everything else will be built. We will repeat this exercise many times before advancing further, not because you have failed to grasp it, but because true mastery requires the kind of ingrained, automatic familiarity that only comes from repetition. Naruto groaned good-naturedly, but there was no real complaint in it. Yeah? Repetition. I get it. If you're new to this channel, you already know I love these training montage chapters, because this is where characters actually earn the power we eventually see them use in the big fights. So let's keep the pace moving, because there's a lot of ground to cover here. Over the following days, Naruto's control over the single chakra thread grew steadily more refined. What had taken agonizing minutes of concentration to summon and hold now came within seconds, the thread extending smoothly from his palm with barely a flicker of hesitation. The Guardian, satisfied with this initial progress, began introducing complexity, teaching him to extend two threads simultaneously, then to guide a single thread through simple movements, curling and extending it like a living extension of his own arm. This is basically just really fancy string, Naruto observed one afternoon, watching a single golden red thread loop obediently through the air in response to his concentration, tracing a slow spiral above his open palm. An understandable comparison for someone unfamiliar with the deeper theory, the Guardian said, a note of what might have been dry amusement in its ancient voice. But understand what you are actually manipulating. This is not merely chakra given shape. It is refined life force, drawn directly from your own vital energy, given form through the Fuinjutsu principles woven into your bloodline. What looks like simple string, in trained hands, becomes capable of binding, draining, and channeling in ways no ordinary ninja tool could ever replicate. Draining? Naruto's ears perked at that. Like draining an enemy's chakra? Among other applications, yes, the Guardian confirmed. The chains, once you progress beyond these single threads to the full manifestation you experience during your uncontrolled eruption, are capable of binding an opponent and siphoning their chakra directly into your own reserves, a technique our clan historically employed against overwhelming numbers when conventional combat proved insufficient. It is, however, an advanced application, and one we will not approach until your foundational control is considerably more solid than it currently stands. Naruto's mind was already racing ahead, imagining the possibilities, but the Guardian's next words pulled him firmly back to the present. Do not let your imagination outpace your discipline, it warned, seemingly reading the excitement plain on his face. Every heir who has ever rushed toward advanced applications before mastering the fundamentals has paid for that impatience, sometimes severely. We proceed at the pace the discipline demands, not the pace your enthusiasm prefers. All right, Naruto said, holding up his hands in mock surrender, though the grin on his face suggested his enthusiasm hadn't actually diminished in the slightest. Fundamentals. Got it. What's next? What came next, over the following several days, was a steady progression through increasingly demanding exercises, controlling multiple threads simultaneously, extending them to greater lengths without losing precision, learning to sense the flow of his own chakra through the threads well enough to adjust their density and strength mid-formation. Each exercise built carefully on the last, the Guardian's patient, exacting instruction never allowing him to advance until a given skill had become genuinely reliable rather than merely occasionally successful. It was, without exaggeration, the hardest sustained mental discipline Naruto had ever attempted in his life. Harder, in its own quiet way, than anything Kakashi or Jiraiya had ever put him through, precisely because there was no clear enemy to overpower, no obvious physical obstacle to simply push past through sheer stubborn effort. Just the slow, grinding work of rewiring old habits of impatience into something steadier. He failed constantly. Threads collapsed prematurely when his concentration wavered. Attempts at dual-thread control frequently ended with one strand snapping back violently enough to leave stinging welts across his palms. More than once, frustration bled through his careful discipline and the chains flared unpredictably, forcing him back through the grounding exercises before he could safely resume. But he kept at it. Day after day, session after session, with a patience that surprised even himself, because for the first time in longer than he could remember, there was nothing pulling his attention elsewhere. No village watching and judging. No teammates to compare himself against. No missions demanding his attention. Just him, the Guardian, and the slow, deliberate work of becoming genuinely skilled at something that was entirely, uniquely his own. One evening, or what passed for evening beneath the vault ceiling, after a particularly grueling session that had left him drenched in sweat and thoroughly exhausted, Naruto found himself sitting quietly across from the Guardian, more contemplative than usual. "Can I ask you something?" he said, breaking a comfortable silence that had settled over the chamber. "You may." Back in Konoha, everybody always talked about the Sage of Six Paths, and how Sage Mode works with the toads, pulling in natural energy from the world around you, balancing it just right so you don't turn to stone. Jiraiya spent months trying to teach me that before pains attack. Is this basically the same thing, just with a different name? The Guardian considered the question for a long moment before answering. Related in principle, but fundamentally distinct in practice, it said. The sage arts taught by the toads of Mount Mayaboku draw from nature energy external to the practitioner, the ambient life force of the world itself, requiring careful balance against one's own chakra to avoid the well-known risks of losing oneself to the natural world's overwhelming scale. What you are learning here draws from something entirely internal, not the world's life force, but your own, refined, channeled, and given form through Fuinjutsu principles unique to our clan's bloodline. So it's not really sage mode in the way people usually mean it, Naruto said, working through the distinction out loud. Correct, though the term has some validity nonetheless, the Guardian said. Both disciplines ultimately aim toward the same broader goal, accessing power beyond what ordinary chakra manipulation allows, achieved through a kind of internal harmony. The toads achieve that harmony by balancing external nature energy against your own. Our clan achieves it by achieving perfect harmony with your own internal life force, refined through discipline rather than borrowed from the world outside. It is, in a sense, a more demanding path in certain respects, because there is no external teacher like the toads to catch your mistakes. But it also grants a stability the borrowed toad sage state cannot fully replicate, since you are never drawing on anything beyond what is already, entirely your own. Naruto turned this over in his mind, something clicking into place. So instead of balancing myself against, like, the whole world's energy, I'm just balancing myself against myself. An elegant way to put it, yes, the Guardian said, something approving in its tone. And in some respects, a more honest discipline, precisely because there is nowhere to hide from your own imbalances. The toad sage arts can occasionally mask a practitioner's inner turmoil behind the sheer scale of borrowed natural energy. Our discipline offers no such mask. Whatever imbalance exists within you will manifest directly in how well, or how poorly, you control these chains, which is precisely why the grounding exercises we practiced earlier this week remain so essential, even now that we have moved into more advanced technique. Makes sense, Naruto admitted. Kind of intense, though. No hiding from yourself. No, the Guardian agreed. Which is, in my judgment, precisely why so few Uzumaki heirs throughout our history ever fully mastered this discipline. It demands not merely chakra control, but genuine self-honesty. A practitioner unwilling to confront their own grief, their own anger, their own fear, will find this power perpetually unstable, no matter how refined their technical skill becomes. Naruto was quiet for a moment, thinking about everything that had brought him here, the ravine, the ambush, the crushing, lonely weight of being left behind by the very people who were supposed to have his back no matter what. Guess it's a good thing I've had plenty of practice confronting stuff like that, he said finally, a rueful half-smile tugging at his mouth. Whole life of it, really. The Guardian regarded him for a long moment, something in its ancient stone expression softening slightly. Yes, it said quietly, I suspect that is precisely why the chains responded to you as strongly as they did, even in their uncontrolled state. You carry more raw material for this discipline than perhaps any heir since Kushina herself. Quick note before we keep going. If you're enjoying this deep dive into how the Uzumaki sage state actually functions, drop a like, because I put a lot of thought into making sure the internal logic of this power actually holds together rather than just being flashy chains for the sake of flashy chains. Alright, let's get back to it. As the days wore on, Naruto's control advanced steadily enough that the Guardian judged him ready to attempt something closer to the full chain manifestation, not the wild, uncontrolled eruption of his first night, but a deliberate, structured summoning built entirely on the foundation of careful thread control he'd spent the preceding week mastering. You're sure about this? Naruto asked, standing now rather than sitting, flexing his hands nervously. Last time this went kind of badly. Last time, you had no foundation whatsoever, the Guardian reminded him. Raw instinct alone, fueled by grief and fear, with no structure to guide it. This time, you approach with a week of disciplined thread control behind you. The risk remains, I will not pretend otherwise, but it is a managed risk now, rather than an uncontrolled one. Naruto took a slow breath, settling into the same grounding technique he practiced dozens of times over the past several days. Okay. Walk me through it. Begin as you would with a single thread, the guardian instructed. But rather than holding it at that scale, allow it to grow, slowly, deliberately, maintaining the same structural control you've built rather than simply releasing restraint the way your instinct did before. Guide the growth. Do not simply permit it. Naruto closed his eyes, reaching for that now familiar warmth, drawing the single thread forward exactly as he'd practiced countless times. But this time, rather than holding it at that modest scale, he carefully, deliberately allowed more of the warmth to flow forward, watching, in his mind's eye, the thread thicken gradually, methodically, like a rope being braided strand by careful strand rather than simply yanked free all at once. The vault's ambient light flickered slightly as golden red chakra began building at his back, script tracing slowly up his forearms. But this time, crucially, the growth felt entirely different from the wild, panicked eruption of his first attempt. It felt guided, deliberate, like something he was actively shaping rather than something happening to him. A single chain, thick as his wrist, extended slowly from behind his shoulder, hovering in the air with a steadiness that would have been impossible during his uncontrolled surge days earlier. It glowed with the same golden red light, ancient script tracing its length in slow, deliberate patterns, but where the eruption had felt feral and desperate, this felt controlled, present, like an extension of his own will rather than something fighting against it. I've got it, he breathed, eyes still closed, sweat beading at his temple with the effort of maintaining such careful restraint. I actually feel like I've got it this time. You do, the guardian confirmed, something like genuine pride threading through its ancient voice now. Open your eyes. See what you have built. Naruto opened his eyes to find a single, massive chain hovering in the air before him, thick and solid, glowing with contained golden red power, responding to the faintest shift of his concentration with smooth, deliberate movement rather than the wild, feral lashing of his first encounter with this power. This is incredible, he whispered, guiding the chain in a slow arc through the air, watching it move exactly as he intended, precise and controlled. This is actually incredible. This is merely the beginning, the guardian said. A single chain, fully controlled, held for less than a minute. But it is proof, Naruto, that discipline can master what instinct alone very nearly destroyed. Release it now, slowly, the same care you used to summon it. Naruto carefully guided the chain back, watching it recede into the golden red glow at his back before fading entirely, script disappearing beneath his skin. He let out a long, shaky breath, exhausted but genuinely, deeply satisfied in a way that felt different from any victory he'd ever earned in front of an audience. That felt amazing, he said, grinning despite his exhaustion. Like, actually amazing. Not scary amazing, like last time. Just amazing. You should be proud of this progress, the guardian said. Many heirs throughout our clan's history required considerably longer to achieve this level of controlled manifestation. Your natural aptitude, combined with genuine discipline, has carried you further in a week than I expected possible. Naruto's grin widened at the praise, something warm settling in his chest that had nothing to do with chakra exhaustion. So what's next? More chains? Bigger chains? The draining thing you mentioned? Patience, the guardian said, though there was clear warmth beneath the familiar admonishment now. We will build toward multiple chains, and eventually toward the draining technique, in time. For now, rest. Tomorrow, we continue refining what you have already achieved before advancing further. Let's shift focus for a moment, because Team 7's story has been developing too, and there's something important happening on their end that you need to see before we head back into the vault. The search had grown increasingly desperate over the past several days, Team 7 and their 2 additional Konoha shinobi pushing steadily southeast along whatever faint traces of Naruto's original trail they could recover. Traces that grew fainter and more uncertain with each passing day, the forest and coastline offering few clear signs of a boy who'd clearly been moving with purpose rather than aimless wandering. We're running out of supplies, one of the additional shinobi, a quiet chunin named Hoshino, observed one evening as their small camp settled for the night. If we don't find something concrete soon, we'll need to consider turning back for resupply. We're not turning back, Sakura said immediately, sharper than she probably intended, though nobody in the group seemed inclined to argue the point too forcefully. 5 days into the search, her exhaustion had become plain in the shadows beneath her eyes, but her determination hadn't wavered in the slightest. Sakura's right, Kakashi said, studying the map by firelight, tracing the coastline that lay somewhere ahead of their current position. We're close to whatever's out there. Turning back now, without answers, isn't an option I'm willing to accept. Sasuke, seated slightly apart from the group as usual, spoke up from the shadows. What exactly is out there? You mentioned Old Whirlpool territory before. What do you actually know about it? Kakashi was quiet for a moment, considering how much of his own knowledge was actually reliable versus half-remembered fragments from old academy lessons rarely emphasized in Konoha's official curriculum. Uzushiogakure, he said finally. The hidden Whirlpool village. Destroyed generations ago, before any of us were born. It was allied with Konoha, closely allied in fact. The Uzumaki clan originated there. Sakura's head snapped up at that. Wait. Uzumaki. Like Naruto's surname, yes, Kakashi confirmed quietly. I don't know the full history myself. It's not something taught in much detail, likely for political reasons buried further back than any of us have clearance to fully understand. But if there's any truth to why Naruto's trail leads in this exact direction, it may not be coincidence at all. You think he's looking for something connected to his mother's clan? Sakura asked, something in her voice caught between hope and confusion. I think, Kakashi said carefully, that whatever's drawing him southeast, it's worth finding out exactly what it is, and exactly what it might mean for the boy we left behind in that ravine. The camp fell quiet after that, each member of the search party turning over the implications in their own way. Sasuke, in particular, seemed to withdraw further into contemplative silence, staring into the low campfire. Just quiet tea brewed over the flame, the way any properly disciplined Konoha shinobi team would handle a long, difficult search, his thoughts clearly turning toward questions about legacy and bloodline that hit closer to home than he probably wanted to admit. We move at first light, Kakashi said finally, rolling the map away. If Uzushiogakure's ruins are really out there, and if Naruto's really headed toward them, I want to reach him before whatever he's found out there changes things beyond what any of us can anticipate. None of them, in that quiet evening camp, could have possibly guessed just how much had already changed. Back in the vault, several more days passed in much the same steady, disciplined rhythm, grounding exercises each morning, chain manifestation practice building gradually in scale and duration each afternoon, quiet conversation with the guardian each evening covering fragments of clan history, sealing theory, and occasionally, when Naruto felt like talking about it, memories of his life back in Konoha that he was only now beginning to process with any real distance. You know, he said one evening, watching a single controlled chain hover obediently above his open palm, I used to think getting stronger just meant learning bigger jutsu. Like, the more impressive the technique, the stronger you were. And now? The guardian prompted. Now I think maybe it's more like, he paused, searching for the right words, guiding the chain through a slow, deliberate spiral before letting it recede. Maybe it's more like learning to actually be steady. Like, all the biggest, flashiest jutsu in the world don't matter much if you can't hold yourself together when things go wrong. The guardian was quiet for a moment, something like genuine approval settling into its ancient stone features. That, it said finally, is precisely the wisdom this discipline was designed to cultivate. You are beginning to understand something many far more experienced shinobi never fully grasp in their entire careers. Naruto grinned, some of his old confidence, tempered now by real, hard-earned discipline, showing through. Guess getting left in a ravine was good for something, huh? I would not go quite that far, the guardian said, dry amusement threading through its ancient voice, but I will grant that you have made remarkable use of an otherwise devastating circumstance. Tomorrow we advance further still. You have earned the attempt. Naruto settled back against the cool stone wall, exhausted but deeply, quietly satisfied, chains resting easy beneath his skin, and for the first time since the ravine wall collapsed on top of him, allowed himself to genuinely believe that whatever happened next, whether Team 7 found him, whether Konoha ever fully understood what he'd become out here, he was no longer simply the boy who'd been left behind. He was becoming something else entirely. And outside the vault, drawing steadily closer with each passing day, the people who'd left him behind were about to find out exactly what that meant.